So I believe Marty is going to finish up the session for you, and I'm starting out talking about ergonomics in retail. So first of all, ergonomics is a word that we see around quite a lot. You might buy an ergonomic knife for the kitchen or a tool for the garden, and it's used as kind of an adjective without it necessarily meaning what. So it is the study of people at work, and it is ensuring that a person is the centre of the work system. It's fitting the task to the human rather than asking the person to adjust to the task. It focuses, most important thing I think, is that it focuses on the relationship between people and your whole work system with the person at the centre of it. You will know from your own life experience that you can adopt an uncomfortable posture for a period of time, and to begin with it's fine, and quickly it will become uncomfortable. And that's what we're trying to avoid in work, is putting the person at the centre and adjusting things around them rather than ask them to sort of stoop or bend or reach, because it becomes tiring and painful really quickly. So that's the basis of ergonomics. It's human-centred and it's fitting the task to the person. It has physical, cognitive and organisational elements. Physical is your obvious, your reach, your height, all the physical characteristics that people have. Cognitive is things like motivation, what keeps people interested and engaged, not becoming tired and feeling faded, and what sort of mental workload we can cope with, whether it's fast-paced or self-paced, and all those elements affect it. And organisational is in terms of where the work system is, where the work is happening. So there's cultural things within a work organisation that can affect the way we work and the way things are done. So organisational is kind of the way things are done around here in different companies. So the things that I look at when I go out to see customers are, first of all, the physical measurements of the workstation, and that looks at is covered by anthropometry, and anthropometry is the measurements of people, and there are huge databases and lots of information for different populations about sizes and shapes of people, heights, reaches, eye height, sitting height, and all that kind of thing. So when we look at a target population, using that information, it helps us to design something that's going to fit with the greatest number of people. Biomechanics is what we can physically do, looks at strength, muscle control, and all that kind of thing, what our muscles are capable of. Cognitive psychology is your motivation, what keeps people interested and engaged, and the work tasks. So why is an ergonomics important, and why have you listened to this seminar today? Improved ergonomics at a workstation leads to an improved comfort, so people work with more comfort, which helps to in turn reduce their fatigue. You will know if you stand for too long or sit in one position for too long, you feel tired and achy, particularly if it's a bad and uncomfortable posture that you sat in or stood in for a while. People who are comfortable feel happier, feel better about their jobs. This can lead to improved productivity. If you're not aching and tired, you sort of work at a better rate. And importantly, this can lead to reduced absenteeism and staff turnover. It's expensive to recruit and train staff, and to try and keep a hold of them, it is really important. It reduces the business expense by keeping people engaged and employed once you've invested in recruiting and training them. So that's how you get your increased profitability. Also, people who are working at good ergonomic workstations are less likely to develop injuries and strain, and so you can reduce any sort of litigation or problematic experiences in that regard. So moving on to retail ergonomics, it's different and it's unique to other work areas because in retail we have limited task variation. People often do the same thing for long hours. It might be scanning at a checkout or serving customers at a cash desk, and it could be for you an 8 or a 10-hour shift with breaks, obviously, but it's a limited task variation. It's not a huge amount of difference, and people may be stuck at sort of one place, not able to walk around a store if it's really busy particularly, and so they are doing the same thing for long periods of time. Everyone knows that the cash desk and checkout and payment area is not the biggest and brightest part of the store. So we're looking at a small area, so it's a limited space with not necessarily a huge amount of area in which to work. Tasks are very repetitive and generally not self-paced. You're working to the queue, working to the line of customers in front of you. So it could be very fast and hectic, particularly around holidays, or it could be a bit slower. But all those things impact on an ergonomic workstation. We need public access. Everybody needs to be able to get through the store, and that's really important. We can't design for just the people we know about, because all the people in the population may want to come. And so we need to design for everybody. You can make allowances for certain individual characteristics if you need to, if you know who your staff is, but we are looking at the general public. So it's a huge design challenge to make sure that everything's accessible for everybody. And there's technology in retail, and it changes really quickly, and there's new things all the time to try and incorporate or change to in this particular environment. So some of the technologies that we're looking at, touchscreens are no longer the new business that they were, but uptake has been huge, and they're pretty much everywhere. We're doing PIN and contactless payments, so that equipment and technology needs to be at the checkout or at the cash desk. People are using tablets, and that might be both on the counter, affixed to the counter in a position where they're not moved, or they may be mobile devices that are sort of used around the store, both for queue busting or for information lookup or stock control. And then you've got all the usual things that we always had, scanners and printers and perhaps currency checkers. It all needs to be squeezed into this one place. So when we start to look at new technology, there are two options. We can either design our new workstation with everything that we're currently using and hopefully not going to change for a period of time, and start with a sort of textbook perfect workstation, everything designed to go in it, and it's from the ground up, it's new, and you put in a new workstation, and that's the beginning point. However, that doesn't really happen very often. Often we're adding new equipment and new technology to an existing workstation, and the goal here is to ensure that anything new you add doesn't impact negatively on the workstation as a whole. So whenever we make a change, we have to ensure that we train people on how to use it and the best way to achieve the best result. It's really important that if you make changes to a workstation, particularly if you make changes in terms of adjustability, that you tell people it's there, because if they've worked in an old workstation, or worked in an old place for a while, and you make an investment and change it, make it so it's height adjustable or reach adjustable or something to improve the ergonomics. As you add a new technology, you need to make sure that people understand that they can do this and why they should do it and how. Otherwise you may lose your investment if it's not used. So our inclusive target population, we're designing for everybody, both our employees who we know and the public who we don't. We're designing for able-bodied people, disabled people, that's permanent and temporary disability, and we're designing for elderly people, anybody who walks through our door. So that's a huge challenge. And employee versus customer use. Some technology or some equipment is used by employees, and that's great because you know who they are and you can train them. And some are used by the public, and that is the differences predominantly are in terms of the duration and the frequency of use. Your employees who you know are going to use something for their whole working day, perhaps, or a significant part of it, whereas a customer may come in once a week or once every couple of days and use the equipment then. So it's important that a customer can access it, but it's critical that an employee can use it in a more comfortable position. You can ask a customer to reach a little bit or adjust a little bit because they're not going to be using it for the length of time. There is, of course, legislation surrounding all this. Health and safety, OSHA legislation, and accessibility legislation for customers. So customers need to access any interactive elements. They want things to be easy to use, they want to see where it is, and they want it to be intuitive. Customers get used to seeing things in one place, and when they go into a store and they get to the cash desk and they're ready to pay, if they don't see the payment terminals where they're sort of expecting it, it can slow down the whole process. So you can streamline customers through the checkout or through the cash desk by making it intuitive. They know where things are going to be, it's where they're expecting, and it just streamlines the payment process. It's important for employees to consider that they may have some kind of job stress, that they're doing often visual tasks when they're looking at screens all day, and musculoskeletal tasks is both interacting with the till equipment and also any lifting or packaging of items. So we need to get all of those things crammed into this little space at the cash desk or the checkout. So Ergonomics meets these challenges by looking at the target population. Who are they and what are their descriptors? And that's the anthropometry I talked about earlier. A big part of that, you're looking at who these people are and what their capabilities, physical measurements are. The environmental considerations is where is it taking place? Is there any sunlight that might glare on screens, make them difficult to see? What can we do about that? Is there any ambient noise, which means you might not hear auditory alarm? So we need to consider all of that. We're looking at the security of users and the equipment. We don't want anybody to hurt themselves accidentally or, unfortunately, vandalise our equipment. And all evaluation starts with a good task analysis, which is where you look at the intended task, break it down to its smallest possible components, and see how it comes together as one task, one work challenge, and make sure that everything is designed around these little task analysis so that you know that it's not involving any great big reaches or heights that can't be managed or too many repetitive movements. And once we get the task analysis done and know who we're designing for, then you start to look at how you can apply ergonomic principles to this work. So, as I said, the ergonomic approach does focus on humans. The individual differences are described in anthropometry, and it is a system approach. So we look at the goal of the work system, the intended goal of the work system, and you would also look at any unintended use, just to make sure you're not putting anybody in danger. And you start with a task analysis. Really important thing in retail and most areas these days is accessibility. You can make reasonable adjustments for people you know. Where you're looking at the public disabled users, you need to have accessibility for them across the shop floor and through the checkouts and tills, whether that's by designing all of them to be accessible to everybody, or whether it's making an adjustment and having certain things that are disabled accessible. Accessibility is really well defined by the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA. It talks a lot about requirements, physical attributes, maximums and minimums, that you can put things at, heights, reaches, and you can also read that tells about how many accessible lanes you may need for different within the store, depending on how many checkouts you have or how many cash points you have. It's very well defined, which does make life that little bit easier because you can sort of follow the guidelines. You can also get sensory assistance, particularly if somebody's going to be using a kiosk or an unattended technology point in store, and that's something like that. An example of this is the Storm Audio Nav, and that's a device for partially sighted or blind users. They can use it. It will speak any prompts on a touch screen and help them to navigate through a system, to look up information or purchase tickets, check into flights, all that kind of thing. It's a really handy piece of kit if you've got unattended terminals which have electronic displays. So I'm going to talk now about some of the customer projects that I've worked on, just to give you an example of the kind of work that we can do and where we can be of assistance. This is a home electronics retailer, and I was called in because they were having some problems with staff complaints across the whole of their estate, complaining of back and shoulder and neck pain. And I think looking at this picture that I took when I was on site, see why that probably was, the counters are just really, really low. There's very little space, and there was no adjustment in the system. They couldn't move the screen. I think they could swivel it left to right, but there was no height adjustment and a very limited tilt adjustment. So even sort of average height people were having trouble using it. The tall people had no hope. Short users pretty much doing okay in this instance. So we had a look at it, and they had, in one of the stores, the picture on the left, they had made their own adjustments. They had used printer paper, Reiss' printer paper, to raise the keyboard and the mouse. They still couldn't do too much about the screen, so we came in and mounted it for them and put it within the height range that they were going to be able to use it. So this is now a height adjustable screen. The keyboard is raised, and at a later edition we also raised the mouse so that it was at a suitable work height for everybody. There was also the option here to have the keyboard so it would extend out towards the user so that they had a little chance of sitting on maybe a perch stool, because there is no foot gap or knee gap underneath this desk. It is flush to their feet. So they were at risk of litigation, and we have managed to, fortunately, bring this to a halt by making changes, starting with the store, so they have serious problems and they're going to have to sort of address the estate as a whole now. So I went to have a look and did an evaluation and took some measurements and photographs and video and some interviews with staff, and so you can see the kind of information that you get there. From the report, the raw data that was collected, some of it anyway, and then we get to look at the changes made and why, and how it's an improvement. Right, so we also looked at a DIY retailer, and again, pretty much the same method: observations, photography, measurements of the workstation, interviews with the employees who were working the day that we were there, and then looking at changes that could be made easily in this particular workstation, because it's DIY, they are using large and heavy items coming through the checkouts to be sold. So we were able to make some changes to that so that we reduce some of these really long reach postures, some of the ones that can be potentially damaging. Right. Design versus functionality. This is a problem that I experience a huge amount. The designer is given a brief by the customer, and the most important thing to a designer is fitting everything in, but aesthetics. Aesthetics is the most important thing. Has to look great, has to look beautiful, has to look sleek, has to fit into the store environment. And while that is important to the ergonomist or a human factors expert or a usability expert, the most important thing is that the user is at the centre of the work system and that it works and it's functional. So we're looking at usability and functionality. And unfortunately, the two often don't agree, and the usability is often forgotten, and that can be really expensive because you end up with something that isn't what you needed and causes people problems, and you then have to start again or make changes. depending on how far you've got through the process. It depends on how important it is. A really important point to notice is that research in retail shows that customers don't really notice technology. And often a design brief is given to a designer. We don't want customers to see our technology. We don't want them to sort of feel that it's in their face. And while it is important to ensure that there's no barrier between the employee and a customer while the payment or customer service is going on, we do need to remember that customers expect to see technology now, and they don't notice it, and it doesn't cause them a negative impression. So all the things we need to consider when we are designing at our point of sale: the task requirements, the equipment, both how often we're going to be using it and where we're going to put it, the posture of the people who are going to be using it, and the suitability and adjustability of any equipment we're giving so that it can fit with lots of different people. We don't have the luxury of everybody having their own workstation in retail. So important ergonomic design principles. We need the body to be aligned and balanced in a neutral posture. I talk about a neutral posture with customers a lot. And if you think about standing comfortably with your feet squarely under your hips and just sort of in a relaxed posture, you know that you're comfortable and you're not using a lot of muscular activity to hold yourself up. In the opposite, if you're leaning or reaching, quickly becomes uncomfortable. So that's an awkward or asymmetrical posture. So we want to maintain a neutral posture at all times. Design of products and workstations and equipment should always aspire to good ergonomic design principles. So neutral posture, hugely important. Second principle is that we need to make sure that people are working in the comfort zone. The power zone, if you're lifting heavy objects, but the comfort zone is what you can comfortably reach without having to really extend your arms or move your feet too far. You don't have to lean. So that helps to maintain the neutral posture because you're working in the area that's close to the body, area you can reach easily. And that is, of course, slightly different for everybody because we all have different length arms. We need to allow for a little bit of movement, a little bit of dynamic activity. Everybody knows that if you stand for a long period of time or sit for a long period of time in a static position, you start to feel uncomfortable and fatigued and sore, and that's a static load. So you need to design in a chance for people to move around, whether that's just taking a couple of steps to pick up something that's used only every 10 or 20 transactions, something that's used infrequently, or ensuring that there are sort of adequate rest breaks through a shift. Just gives people a chance to move around. Often we can manage this by job rotation. You might work on checkout for 3 hours, you might load shelving for a couple of hours, and you may go back to the checkout for the rest of the day. It can also be designed around if you've got people working on mainline checkouts, you can have checkouts that are both left-handed and right-handed. So you might spend the first half of your shift working with goods coming from your right-hand side and the second half of your shift with goods coming in from your left-hand side. Just helps you to move and work in different postures. We don't want people to be exerting excess force over the period of their working day. Occasionally is of course fine, but repeated is tiring. So we want people to be able to sort of relax and not use the muscles as a high load on the human body. That can be often alleviated. You can often alleviate that kind of need, but if you have got huge items or heavy items, using a hand scanner, you get your employee to come out from behind the checkout and scan with the hand scanner, and that's great because then they've moved, which is principle 3, and they haven't lifted anything particularly heavy, which is the principle 4. So we want to reduce excessive movement. We don't want people to be doing lots and lots of repetitive motion. Some is, of course, required, and where we are doing repetitive motion, for example, scanning items through a mainline supermarket checkout, it needs to be designed so that that can be done the best possible way. That's the most important task done at that checkout, so it's the central task of focus. But if we can remove any other sort of repetitive movements by ensuring that equipment's laid out right and is close to hand, say people walking back and forth or reaching repeatedly. That's the way we need to design the workstation. Minimise contact stress. That's where you don't want people to have to lean on sharp edges or anything that's uncomfortable, that's in continuous contact with the body tissues. Arms, legs, feet, as you're sitting or standing at a workstation, will become uncomfortable really quickly. So we just want to consider that we've got smooth edges, no sharp corners. So again, it's very it's very important to remember that customers don't really notice technology. Great service in retail comes from friendly, helpful and efficient employees. Good workstation design empowers employees, and conversely, poor workstation design does disempower. So that's our goal. Our goal is a great workstation design so that it's comfortable, productive, efficient and satisfying for our employees. So two types of work that I do kind of link to what I was saying earlier. There's retrospective work, where we're making modifications or improvements to a current workstation. So fitting new equipment or technology to something we've already got, we're adding in something new. Could be adding a new mobile tablet that's going to be used part of the time. So we start with what's already in store and we make the change, trying not to impact it in a negative way. There's no point in changing one element of the workstation for the better if you change several for the worse. And then prospective work is where you start at the beginning of a shiny new project because there's going to be a new store with new furniture and a new design, new look and feel, and works from the ground up. And that's a great way of getting everything perfect, but obviously a lot more expensive. So here's some other past projects we've looked at. Checkouts, trying to design things so that items come in from the left and from the right. There's no long reaches. People can see what they're doing. There's no obstructions. You can see that the checkout on the left, goods are flowing through quite quickly. She's scanning them in front of the scanner. Doesn't appear to be a problem. Whereas the checkout on the right, there's a very narrow space for goods to come in. There's a little bit of a bottleneck. She's having to manipulate the goods a lot to pass them through.
It's funny they're sitting.
Yeah, unfortunately. It is actually better to stand, and it is also better to, if possible, to do both, sit and stand. So in Europe, predominantly seated work for this. I'm from New Zealand and we will stand as well. This is a grocery store, not to do with checkouts or payment. On the left, you can see it's a delicatessen case with the cold cuts and delicatessen antipasti foods. And it was a new store and they had rolled out, and the store was open for business, and it was noticed that the staff at the delicatessen case were performing as really terrible and awkward reaches to get stuff from the front to serve customers with. And so I went in and we were able to redesign the case, and they had to replace them. The final design was slightly shorter back to front, and we also reconfigured where things were so that the heavy, frequent use things were at the back of the counter, were easier to reach, and the things that were sold less frequently or were smaller and lighter were at the front. So, and the produce shelving on the right, this is a concept. It hasn't yet rolled out into store, and it did from here. And it's moving heavy items into the store rather than loading the bags of potatoes here. Rather than loading bags of potatoes onto a trolley, taking it to the shop floor, and then physically putting it on the shelves, they designed a trolley that they could just load with potatoes and slide into place. So it was quicker and less manual work. And that was just checking that it all worked and there was no unnecessary strain on people. A lot of work in the transportation area, bus, rail, airport, ticketing predominantly, selling tickets, making sure that the ticketing counters are tidy, and this one is particularly awful. They can sit, but they can stand, but there's not really the room for sitting, and often people do want to sit when they're doing ticketing because there is a boom and bust situation where it's really, really busy, and so they like to stand and work quickly, and then when it's really quiet, quite a time to sit down. So we were able to had to redesign this. Clothing retailers, this is one of the problems we have with clothing retailers, is that the aesthetic is very important to them. They want their stores to look sleek and modern and tidy. You can see the picture on the right, the touchscreen is not adjustable, subject to glare from the overhead lights at times, and very, very low. This one did have to be redesigned so that it was no longer behind the counter. The one on the left, the screens are tilt adjustable, they swivel, much better. You can see the technology, but it's not particularly eye-catching. So we do a lot of work in non-food retail. You can just see we're trying to get the payments in the right place, ensure that everything's laid out tidily. And of course we're going for adjustability. The picture in the middle is the electronics grocery store, and you can see that here we've got the screen raised up much higher, and she's working in a very neutral posture as opposed to the guy at the bottom left who's definitely not. Right, I now am going to pass over to my colleague Marty. He's going to take you through the next half of the presentation. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Melanie. Can everyone hear me? Can anyone hear me?
I can hear you, Marty.
I can hear you, Marty. You're
a little faint, but we can hear you.
All right, great. Thank you. So I'm not sure if I have control of this slide thing or not. I guess I do. Okay, good. So thank you, Mel. I appreciate it. And we just sat through about 35 minutes of a lot of facts and figures and information. So why do we care? We care because the retailer should care, and they don't even know that they should care. So in the U.S., we're known as SpacePole. We are owned by a company called Ergonomic Solutions. So if that word ergonomic rings a bell, it's because we've been talking about it for the last 35 minutes. I think many times as a representative of SpacePole, I forget that our goal is ergonomics. And as resellers and as partners of retailers, we should remember that we are playing a consultative role, and that ergonomics makes a big difference to retailers. So SpacePole is kind of like a misnomer, all right? It's really SpacePole Ergonomic Solutions, and I struggle with that sometimes to remember it, but I think we should all remember it. So my portion of this is really to tell you guys, so what? I'm going to talk to you a couple of minutes about why retailers should care about ergonomics, other than the obvious, and then cover a little bit about why, as resellers, we should be telling our customers about ergonomic solutions, and maybe even incorporating studies by Mel. Okay? So, litigation, right? So, we look at ADA and OSHA and all the requirements that our customers are required to go through in order to make their stores safe. Okay, but it's not just externally focused, it's also internally focused. Mel talked a little bit about your customers, the retailer's customers, and the employees. Excuse me. So it's very important for the retailers to avoid litigation. So if you look at this chart and you look at lawsuits from 2014 to 2017, you can see that there's quite a bit of increase year over year, and this is costing the retailers a lot of money. When I first joined SpacePole, I asked the question, what is the compelling reason for our customers to buy our stuff? If this isn't compelling, I'm not sure what is. Okay, so ADA retail lawsuits in dollars and cents. This means something to every retailer, every grocer, every hospitality owner, everybody, what it costs us in dollars and cents. That chart that you're looking at on the left is loss of money in billions. That's billions with a B. Okay, so by 2020, it'll be $30 billion. Now, granted, it's not just the placement of payment amounts and that sort of thing, but in general, we are a litigious society, and the retailers need to be protected against things like frivolous lawsuits. So you should ask our customers, are you willing to take the risk? All right, the average settlement per suit is about $16,000. Why is that? Because the cost of fighting that lawsuit is about $75,000. So, in the case of an ADA compliance issue, if your sign is 3 inches too low and somebody notices that your sign is 3 inches too low, you can get sued for that, and you probably still it costs you $16,000 out of pocket. Okay, same thing with compliance with payments or the registers or lawsuits relating to employees. Okay, so we go to our retailer and we tell them about this, and the retailer is going to say, well, you know, it costs a lot of money. And I don't want to really go through these per se, but you can take a look at some of the reasons why a retailer should look at an ergonomic solution and not just buy a pole, because a pole is not just a pole. Okay? Okay, so from the retailer's point of view, what does he stand to gain? Well, there are fewer injuries on the job. The employees are more productive. They're happier. A big thing for saving money for the retailer is that there are fewer workers have compensation claims. Fewer employees experience pain, there's increased productivity, increased morale, reduced absenteeism. All these things add up to a happier employee, and thus a happier employer. So when somebody says, hey, why should I mount the payment mount, or why should I put in what we call a Johnny arm to extend down to the disabled customer in a wheelchair, these are some of the reasons. So if you look on third bullet, about 3 down, the direct cost of MSDs is $20 billion a year. $20 billion. All right, that's quite a nut out of our whole retail scope of things. So the slides prior to this were from the retailer point of view. So why SpacePole? All right, why should you guys as resellers be selling SpacePole stuff? Okay, obviously because we make more money, we sell more stuff. Okay, but we are consultants to our customers. In many cases, our customers look towards their reselling partners, not just supplying hardware, not just supplying software, but supplying a solution to an issue. Sometimes, as you guys know, the issue isn't as apparent as it might be. I used to have a boss who told me they don't know what they don't know. So it's our job to tell them. And when we tell them, we are partners with SpacePole Ergonomic Solutions. We can offer a service to that retailer, becoming the consultant, becoming the expert, and ultimately making us more valuable to the customer. So we have a lot of project expertise. Mel is available for you to go out to your customer. She does anything from a day to a week. Mel, I think in places like Hawaii, you'll actually do a month. But we offer that service, and there is a fee. That also makes you guys a couple of bucks as well. When we talk about the results of what Mel goes out to look at, or what we as sales reps go out to look at in the store, we become a technology driver. Our solutions say, hey, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't do that type of payment device because it's too small. The screen is too small. The keys are too small. maybe you should be doing this instead of that. Maybe you should raise the touch screen 3 inches in order to avoid that repetitive motion injury that your customer may have. I walked into a retailer, clothing retailer, and every associate, as Mel showed you in one of those pictures, was bending over, typing on their keyboards, and everybody was flexing their back because they were tired. The screens were in such a position that the windows were behind the checkout, and they're constantly moving depending on where the sun is because of the glare. It created quite an issue inside the store. We were able to solve that. We sold a number of poles with tilt and swivel. The employees are happier. The customers are happier because the employees are happier. Okay? So maybe the most important thing for you is incremental revenue. Okay? The deal that I just talked about was probably to the reseller, $2 million deal in total, but there was an extra $400,000 in mounting solutions that they were able to add to that deal and make a margin on. That's considerable. So think about mounting when you start going out and selling your technology, whether it's the POS, the tablet, whatever. Think about mounting. Think about security on the payment devices, that sort of thing. I just put a deal into one of our accounts. It was almost $600,000 in locks, just the locks for their payment device. Think about that stuff when you go out to your customers. Okay? Any questions on what I've been talking about yet so far? Great. Okay, so when you're thinking about SpacePole / Ergonomic solutions, we talk about physical protection for our devices, our understanding of legislation, the ADA requirements, OSHA requirements, and just in general ergonomic principles that we learn when we're out doing our training in Europe or when Mel comes out. All right, we can do it for you guys. Please call us in. We have close relationships with all our technology partners such as NCR, Toshiba, Ingenico, Verifone, et cetera, et cetera. We know what's coming down the line. Sometimes they actually ask us for our help. Unfortunately, not always, and we're developing new solutions for their products. But I did with an unnamed technology partner of ours, and the retailer asked me, and I quote, "How are you going to fix their mounting problem?" And we were able to do it. So let us help you help your customers. So you might have noticed that about 2 years ago, we changed our focus and our strategy on going to market, whereas our old company, C-Mark, was primarily a direct sale machine. We have now become almost 100% channel focused. Although we supply 60% of the top global retailers, of that 60%, my guess would be 85% is through resellers and through the channel. Okay, so we're here for, I hate to say this, but we're here for you. Trust us. So let us help sell more product for you guys. So with that, I will open up the floor to any questions.
So Marty, first off, just want to thank you and Mel. This information is so relevant and useful, and I can definitely see how this will contribute to the employee and customer experience. So I've been monitoring the chat box, and we do have a few questions. We have a question from Trevor in Atlanta, and he has asked, what is the first step to ensuring workstations are ergonomic for both customer and employer?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to take that. That would be doing the task analysis and having a look at who your target population is. So you're in Atlanta, so it's US people. And looking at your task analysis, what do you want your employee to do? What equipment have you given them to use? How do they interact with it? And once you know that and you've had a look at, done your basic task analysis, then you can look at the ways you can lay it out in the best possible way. And using the anthropometry for the correct population, you can ensure that you've got things at the right height, things are in the right reach zone, and that's the starting point, is doing your task analysis, looking at what you've got, looking at what the goal is of the workstation, and then using the information to put it all in the right place.
Awesome.
So Melanie, this is Marty. Can you just go quickly talk about what the process is, or the way you say it in English, what the process is when you do a task analysis for a customer, just quickly.
Okay, so I would be on site, I would stand unobtrusively and quietly in the corner, out of the way. I would watch for a period of time what's going on, what the customers are doing, how they're approaching the workstation, and most importantly for a task analysis, what the employee does to do the service, whether it's working in a kiosk where they're actually selecting the items and selling them, or whether scanning through a checkout items that the customer's bought, interacting with the technology to process the payments, any packaging, whether they have to fold clothing and put it in a bag, or whether the customer self-packs. So it's looking, observing. If it's possible, would like to do an informal interview with some employees. It's important that you talk with experienced employees so they know the work tasks and they've been doing it for a little while, so they are familiar with the equipment and the layout. You don't get valuable information talking to somebody who hasn't been doing it for very long because they just don't have the experience. I make photographs and measurements of the workstation, so I can compare them to population descriptors. Have you got people working at something that's too high for 80% of the population, or too low for 60% of the population? What can we do to change that around? And I also compare them to legislation, just to make sure that you're falling within ADA and OSHA requirements. So that's what happens.
Thank you.
Great. And we have another question. So Tim from Ohio, and it's a great follow-up to your question, Marty. So Tim would like to know if you could share the details of the Ergonomics consultancy program, what's included, and if interested, how they can use or begin the services.
So in the I'll take the Melanie. So in the U.S., in fact, we're going to be doing one next week. Melanie will be here. The first process is, and I will talk from my point of view, is I got Melanie on a conference call with our customer to talk about ergonomic consultancy, to understand what the customer may or may not be interested in, and pretty much we tailor it to what that customer wants to do. Okay, we come up with pricing, we come up with a proposal through the reseller, and we become partners to the retailer. Did I miss anything, Mel?
No, that's great. Yeah. So it's important just to know why you're wanting the ergonomics consultancy, what you're hoping to achieve from it. Are you designing something new, or do you just want to check that what you're doing is right? Or are you adding something new, some new technology element to an existing workstation? And then,
So from my point of view, Tim, it's extremely powerful when you're talking about a consultative sale to the customer. All right, we really kind of lock them in, and it's not just to sell them stuff; it's to really help them. Although I will admit that many of the engagements are basically cover your butt, so in case somebody sues them, they have the
yes,
they can
very
prove that
important.
they did something.
Yeah.
All right. But we don't really care why they do it as long as they do it. It becomes the compelling reason to buy.
And that's why I say that it's important that if they do make some changes, and I've seen this, a customer was having problems at the supermarket checkout, and they spent some money on putting in reach adjustable touchscreens so a short user could bring it a bit closer and a tall user could put it further back. But they didn't tell the employees who'd been doing it, some of them sort of 10, 15 years, that this had been done. And they just rolled out the new technology, new screens on these arms, and they didn't know. And so they got complaints from the staff, you've changed this and it's worse. And I went in to see a couple of sites and talked to the people who had made the complaints. And it purely was because the screens were too far away and they couldn't reach them, because they didn't know that it was possible now to change it. So it is really important to communicate. If you've made the investment, you've done something really great for your employees, sing and shout about it, tell them, make sure they know.
Well, that seems to be all of the questions in the chat box, unless someone else has a question and would like to come off of mute. I want to thank Mel and Marty again. This information has been very useful. We will upload this recording to our partner portal. But if you have any additional questions, please contact us at the number on the screen, as well as via email. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, everybody.